Hi, my name is Ben. I'm one of the co-founders of Monogram Coffee. I'm a Stronghold global ambassador, and I'm also a barista competitor, and I just recently placed third in the world at the World Barista Championships. Roasting on the Stronghold has opened up a lot of opportunities for us. The different sizes across the whole platform allow you to do really small lots for competition or sample roasts up to larger production lots. To have a roaster that's easy to transition between the different sizes has been really useful. But even just getting good clarity of flavor, starting to have more control over all those different little aspects of coffee, it's made coffee easier, but it's also opened up so many opportunities for different roasting techniques that it also makes you think about coffee a whole lot more. Air is the biggest application of heat. It's moving the most things. Lots and lots of studies have shown it's the most even application of heat because that convective heat is really effective. So whenever I'm roasting on any system, but especially on Stronghold, air is the one that I think is the most bang for your buck. That is the one that you have the most control over, that it is the most responsive. If you adjust your air setting, it's gonna move right away. Halogen, to me, I view it as a micro heater, and this is a really useful way to use it. When we're roasting really small specific coffees and you want to have really small changes in rate of rise or temperature, I think that the halogen can be really, really effective. Halogen's a really great way that if you have a roast where you're trying to do small changes of rate of rise, let's say it's a coffee that you are trying to be really delicate with, halogen can be a very, very useful way to do that because it is a much softer application of heat. It's able to push the coffee less than air. So it's a really nice way to have those sort of micro adjustments on things. My view on the drum heater, and again, there's lots of ways to approach it. Some people use the drum heater to try and get a more conductive roast. If you want to have something more like a drum heater, I've seen some people run really high temperatures for the drum heater to try and have it more like old cast iron roaster. I think that's an effective way to do it. My view on roasting is to try and embrace newer technology. So I don't miss the taste of drum roasters. Some people like the body, and that's an effective way to use it. But the way I use the drum heater is to prevent stalls. A big thing for me is just making sure that the coffee hasn't stalled. And by stall, I mean that is no longer increasing in temperature, because basically what you have is a lot of the chemical reactions that are occurring to give your coffee complexity and really good flavor. If those stop occurring because you are no longer increasing in temperature, you'll end up with off flavors, you might end up with bitterness. And so if you're roasting a coffee that gets very close to 0 degrees increase in temperature, your drum heater can really help you with that. So often with drum heater, what I'll do is I'll run it just to make sure that I'm high enough above my bean temperature that if that bean is in contact with that drum wall, that the drum wall isn't sucking heat out of the coffee. So this is my approach to the drum heater. I'm not using it much. I'm not like really playing with it. It's more just to make sure that I know that if that coffee is in contact with metal, that metal is not absorbing heat, that it is sharing heat with the roaster. Something about Stronghold that I think is really important to note is a lot of the issues that we had with previous roasters where we're talking about tipping or like making sure your charge isn't too hot. I kind of think all of that stuff almost doesn't matter on the Stronghold system. I think a lot of the things that roasters really worried about even like between batch protocols, because the Stronghold can measure that preheat, a lot of the things that we used to have to be really careful when we adjust our variables, I don't think matter as much. You can have really hot charges now. You know that between batch variance is going to be really small because the Stronghold already covers that. So a lot of the things that you had to think about and worry about when you were a roaster before, Stronghold kind of sorts out, which is really nice because it lets us just focus on roasting coffee rather than focusing on roast defects. I think that you should have a slightly lower agitation because it allows you to move between batch sizes quite a bit more easily. If you think about the roasting system within a Stronghold, you basically have a tube coming down and then the heat comes out the bottom of that tube. And so my view on agitation is if it's too high on a small batch size, the centrifugal force will eventually push the coffee out of the way of the air. And so my view on agitation, that especially with small batches, is to run it low to make sure that coffee is sitting right underneath that heater. And you can actually see this. If you run agitation too high, you'll be at like max power, but it still feels like the roast is dragging a little bit. And that's because there's nothing to hold that hot air in. It's just basically bypassing the coffee. And so on a good day, agitation can give you maybe more convective heat if you're moving the coffee a bit more. On a bad day, what it can do is it can affect the efficiency of your heat transfer, because suddenly that air is no longer getting forced through the coffee bed, it's getting pushed around. My big thing with roasting is I believe that you need 2 different roast styles. I think for filter coffee, you want to have lots of acidity, you want to really be emphasizing the terroir. Espresso, I think that you need to find a way to break down specifically acidity. That's the thing that I think if you multiply the acidity of a filter roast by 8, when you got up to that strength for an espresso, like a properly extracted espresso, it's going to be really bright. And usually there are some workarounds, but that puts it on the cafe or the barista to try and extract a coffee that might not be optimized for that brew style. There are lots of people out there that are successful omni roasters. I generally just think if you want to make things as easy as possible for your clients or your cafes, and so I think you're generally looking at 2 different roast styles. So for filter coffee, I want to really emphasize the character of the coffee. I want to get good acidity. I want to really get really good intensity, and I want to just make sure it's bright and lively. So very, very high level approach on this is I want to make sure I have decently high rates at first crack. This ensures that you have good development time, that you're really developing flavors. It gives you lots of vibrancy, it gives you good clarity, and it gives you good intensity of flavor. And then the other one is to not really get close to 0. Like you can be pretty far away from the stall. When I'm roasting filter coffee, I'm not worried about stalling the coffee because I have fairly high rates throughout. I'm applying a lot of heat. These are shorter development times, and that's not really the concern. It's more just trying to make sure you have the right rate of rise at first crack. So my approach for espresso is a softer first crack, and the reason why is mostly to do with momentum. We're going to be trying to have much longer development times for espresso. The reason you want a longer development time is to break down acidity. So the way that we break down acidity in espresso roasting is if the temperatures that you're at when you're at first crack are hot enough that you actually have degradation of all the organic acids that are in coffee. So citric acid is breaking down, tartaric acid is breaking down, chlorogenic acids are breaking down. And that's kind of the only way to really do it. You don't want to have your rates so high that you start to burn the coffee. And so essentially what I'm doing is I know that between the point that the coffee cracks and the point that the temperatures that it's going to start to burn the coffee, if I stretch that out, if I hold it there, the coffee will not burn, but it'll start to break some of those acids. And so the way I achieve that is I have a softer first crack because you have less momentum. We're going to hit that point of burning at a later point. And I also run the coffee closer to 0. So development time, just like development time ratio, is highly dependent on your rate of rise at first crack. So coming to your question about how long should your development time be, a lot of it depends on what your rate of rise at first crack is. So if you have a higher rate of rise at first crack, you can assume you're going to have a shorter development time unless you really start to push down your rates at first crack. But I would say generally development time is a better metric because it's going to be consistent from roast to roast. And it's, I think, generally easier to communicate because it's just one number. Development time ratios are harder to know exactly what's going on. Development time, I think as time goes on, will become more of the norm. And then, yeah, how much time? So I would say there are certain limits. Like I think below 40 seconds, it's hard to get things properly developed. And then there are certain things that you will start to battle against if you really extend out your development time. So once the coffee has fully gone through first crack, once there's no moisture left, it will start to want to increase in temperature again. And then you're starting to have to push down those things. So I generally try and work within those two. I know that gives you almost too broad of a range, but I would say for filter roasts, it is very hard to get great development underneath 40 seconds of development time. And for anything else, once you really, unless you're going for a developed roast, you're looking for roasty flavors. Once you see the coffee starting to want to naturally increase on its own, you will start to fight against roast because the coffee naturally wants to run away and it's naturally going to start charring and scorching a little bit. In the age of technology, we often feel like if we're not using every feature, if we're not maximizing it, if the profile isn't super complicated, that it can't be good, or you, especially in this age where you can see other people's profiles, you'll see someone with like 30 adjustments and you'll wonder like, am I not using the roaster properly? Like my profile doesn't look super complicated. And I think the biggest thing is that like really follow your taste, but you do not need to use every feature. And I would say this with every piece of coffee tech out there, You do not need to use every feature. Like find the way that it works, and if that works for you, if you are using like 10% of the technology and it works, that is a perfect way to use that technology.